She was just a home health aide making $12 an hour, and he was the man whose name made city councilmen go quiet mid-sentence. But when Tatum saw the nursing home director grab a frail old woman by the wrist and yank her back into her chair, she didn't think about her student loans or her brother's dialysis appointments or the fact that she needed this placement to keep her certification active. She just moved. Nobody expected her to say a word. Aide's didn't. Not at Cliffside Manor, where the carpets were cream and the chandeliers were imported from Venice and the residents paid $40,000 a month to be treated like furniture. You kept your head down. You smiled. You refilled the water glasses and you pretended not to see things. Tatum had pretended not to see things for 8 months. She was done pretending. The old woman's name was Greta. She was 81 years old, weighed maybe 90 pounds, and had the kind of blue eyes that had probably stopped traffic 50 years ago. She had no family listed in her file. Tatum had checked, the way she checked all her residence files, because knowing who had someone coming on Sundays mattered if you were going to do this job right. Greta had nobody. She sat by the window in room 114 every afternoon and watched the birds at the feeder Tatum had hung there illegally against Cliffside's aesthetic policy, because Greta's face changed when she watched the birds. It went from empty to almost alive. The director's name was Philip Yates. He was 44, trim in the way men are trim when they spend money on it, and he wore his authority the way other men wear cologne, too much, in every room. He had been berating Greta for 10 minutes about a spilled cup of chamomile tea, his voice low and slick, the kind of cruelty that doesn't raise its register because it doesn't have to. Tatum had been watching from the hallway, the back of her neck prickling, waiting for it to stop. It didn't stop, it escalated. His hand shot out and closed around Greta's wrist. Tatum walked in. "Mr. Yates." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Let go of her arm. He turned. The look on his face was almost comic, not anger yet, just genuine disbelief that a home health aide in scrubs was addressing him by name in that tone. "Excuse me? Her skin bruises if you look at it wrong." Tatum crossed the room, stopping directly between him and Greta. "She's on blood thinners. You're going to leave a mark. This resident destroyed a $300 Persian runner. She spilled tea." Tatum said it the way you'd correct a child. Flat, patient, final. "She spilled tea, Mr. Yates, and she's 81 years old, and if you touch her again, I will report this facility to the state ombudsman before you get back to your office." Philip Yates' face went through several colors. He straightened his jacket. He looked at Tatum the way men like him always look at women like her, measuring exactly how much damage he could do. "You're terminated," he said. "Effective right now. Get your things." Tatum crouched down beside Greta's chair. The old woman was trembling, her paper hands folded in her lap. "It's okay," Tatum said quietly. "He's not going to touch you again. I'm going to make sure someone comes to sit with you, all right? Someone good." Greta looked at her with those wrecked blue eyes. Her lips moved. No sound came out, but Tatum had learned to read her. She was saying thank you. Tatum stood up. She looked at Philip Yates. "I'll get my things." She was in the staff locker room, pulling her street shoes out when the door opened. She expected Philip. She got someone else entirely. He was tall in the way that fills a doorway. Not aggressively, just completely. Dark suit, no tie, the kind of quiet that isn't peaceful but is instead very, very controlled. He looked around 50, though something about him read older in the eyes. Silver at his temples, a jaw like architectural detail. Behind him stood 2 men in identical charcoal suits who did not come inside but did not leave either. "I apologize for the intrusion," the man said. His voice had weight to it, the kind that comes from decades of being listened to without having to repeat himself. "My name is Julian Caruso. Greta is my grandmother." Tatum blinked. Her file says no family. Her file was wrong. Something guved across his face. "That is my fault and not hers. I was told there was an incident. There was. I saw the end of it." He paused from the hallway. She processed that. He'd been standing in the hallway, watching. "Then you saw what happened." "I saw a woman put herself between my grandmother and a man who outweighs her by 80 pounds. Julian Caruso looked at her with the kind of attention that makes you feel like you're being read. "And I saw that same woman lose her job for it. I'd do it again. I know." He said it like he'd already decided something. Tatum Rao, Ems Rao. He reached into his jacket and produced a business card. Simple, heavy stock. Just his name and a phone number. "I wonder if you would be willing to have a conversation." "About what?" "About a position." He looked around the locker room, the flickering fluorescent, the scuffed lockers, the smell of industrial cleaner, without judgment, without condescension, just looking. "I have a situation that requires someone with your particular combination of skills. I'm a home health aide." "You're someone who doesn't freeze," Julian Caruso said. "That's considerably rarer." She almost didn't call. She sat in her car in the cliffside parking lot for 20 minutes, turning the card over in her fingers, and thought about her brother Davis, who was 26 and doing dialysis 3 times a week, because their insurance had a gap the size of a canyon, and the gap was getting wider. She thought about the $14,000 in medical billing sitting on her kitchen table. She thought about the fact that she had just lost the job that was paying for those bills. Partially, she called. The car that picked her up the next morning was black and clean and silent, and it took her out of Chicago proper, north along the lake, to a property that didn't look like a home from the outside. It looked like a statement. Limestone and dark glass, set back from the road behind a gate with cameras she counted automatically out of professional habit. 6 visible. Probably more she couldn't see. The man who met her at the door was not Julian Caruso. It was a woman, 50s, sharp face, silver hair cropped close, in the kind of linen blazer that costs what Tatum used to make in a month. Mrs. Rao, I'm Helen, Mr. Caruso's chief of staff. He's in a call, I'll show you through. The inside of the house was the opposite of what she'd braced for. Not cold, not ostentatious. It was full of light and books, and a few things that looked genuinely old and genuinely loved. A worn leather armchair that didn't match anything else in the room. A row of photographs on a shelf that hadn't been professionally arranged. The kind of house where someone actually lived under all the security. Julian was waiting in a room off the main hall that was clearly a working office, not a showroom. He stood when she entered, which surprised her. Mrs. Rao, thank you for coming. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. Please, she sat. She didn't touch the water glass Helen had placed in front of her. I want to be direct with you, Julian said, settling into his own chair. I don't have a lot of patience for preamble. Neither do I. Something shifted in his expression. Approval, maybe. My grandmother requires full-time care, not the kind Cliffside was providing, supervision at a distance, check-ins on a schedule. She needs someone present. Someone with actual medical training who also has the judgment to navigate the other elements of her situation. What other elements? Julian laced his hands together on the desk. I am involved in certain business interests that are not entirely conventional. You may have seen my name in the news at some point. She had. She hadn't placed it until now. Julian Caruso, the Caruso Group, real estate and logistics, and a half-dozen other things. And underneath all of it, if you read the right investigative journalism, a suggestion of other things. The kind of things you didn't name directly. I've seen your name, she said carefully. Then you have some context. I won't insult your intelligence by pretending otherwise. He held her gaze. My grandmother is the only family I have left. She was placed at Cliffside because I was told it was the safest option. Low profile, high security, no connection to my name. That arrangement has clearly failed. He paused. She needs to be here, in this house, with someone I trust. You don't know me. I know that you stood up for her when it cost you something. Julian said, that tells me more than a reference check. Tatum thought about Davis, about the number on the billing statement, about the way he tried to make jokes at the dialysis center to make her feel better about sitting in those chairs with him. What does the position pay? $9,000 a month, plus room and board, health coverage for you and 1 dependent. He said it evenly, like a fact rather than an offer. Your brother Davis is on your current insurance plan. He would remain covered. The dialysis center on Wacker would bill directly to my accounts. Her stomach dropped. How do you know about Davis? I told you, my team is thorough. He didn't apologize. I'm not telling you this to intimidate you. I'm telling you because I want you to understand that I know your situation, and I'm offering to change it. Not as leverage, as a reason to say yes. She stared at him. At the photographs on the shelf behind him, a younger version of him, a woman she didn't recognize, a little girl squinting into sunlight somewhere with a lot of trees. There are rules, she said. He almost smiled. Several. Tell me. Julian settled back. First, you don't ask about business meetings, visitors, or phone calls. You will see things in this house that you are not meant to understand. You don't try to understand them. Second, you don't leave the property without notifying security and taking an escort. This is non-negotiable. Third, he leaned forward slightly. You don't betray my trust. I extend it rarely. I do not extend it twice. Tatum looked at his hands folded on the desk. She thought about Greta by the window watching the birds. If I say yes, she said, Greta comes here within the week. She was moved this morning, Julian said. I assumed you'd agree. She should have been annoyed. She was, a little. But she also understood it. A man who'd spent his life running things at that level didn't wait to see which way the wind blew. He moved first and adjusted later. She held out her hand. Julian Caruso shook it. His grip was firm and brief, and told her nothing about what he was thinking. Welcome to the house, Ms. Rao, he said. The first days were about geography, learning the house the way you learn any new patient's home, where the hazards are, where the light comes in. which floors creak. Greta's suite was on the main floor, east wing, with a garden view and a thermostat Tatum recalibrated immediately because elderly patients run cold, and whoever had set it before clearly didn't know that. Greta herself was quieter here than she'd been at Cliffside, but it wasn't the bad kind of quiet. It was the quiet of someone finally allowed to stop bracing. She slept better. She ate more. On the third day, she held Tatum's hand for a full 10 minutes, while they watched a documentary about the Great Barrier Reef and didn't say anything at all, and that was its own kind of communication. Julian came to see her every morning before his day started. He was always in a suit by 7. He'd sit at the foot of her bed or at the small table by the window and talk to her quietly, about the weather, about whatever she'd been watching, about nothing that mattered, which meant it mattered a great deal. Tatum would find something to do in the room that kept her busy without being intrusive, because she understood that what she was witnessing was the careful rebuilding of something that had been neglected, and it needed room to breathe. She didn't ask why he'd neglected it. It wasn't her place. Not yet. On day 6, she rounded a corner on the way to the kitchen and walked into a conversation she wasn't meant to hear. 2 men she didn't recognize were standing in the hall outside Julian's office, speaking in low, rapid voices. One of them had blood on his shirt cuff, partially hidden by his jacket sleeve. She saw it anyway. Spotting things like that was occupational reflex. She kept walking, eyes forward, but her pulse had notched up. Later that evening, Julian found her in the sunroom where Greta had fallen asleep in a chair. He stood in the doorway and looked at her with a kind of evaluating attention. "You saw something this afternoon," he said. "No," she said. "I saw 2 men in a hallway," she said precisely. "I don't know who they are or what they were discussing. I wasn't in the hallway long enough to form opinions about it." Julian was quiet for a moment. "You're very careful with your words." "I work in healthcare," she said. "Documentation matters. I've learned to only say what I actually know." He looked at her for a long moment. "Are you frightened?" Tatum considered Greta sleeping in the chair, her chest rising and falling, the small sound she made when she was comfortable. "I'm where I need to be," she said. "That's enough." Something shifted in Julian's face, subtle but there. He nodded once and left. 3 weeks in, and Greta was laughing. It wasn't a big laugh. Her body couldn't do big laughs anymore, but it was real, a rustling, surprised sound that came out of her when Tatum told her about the time she'd gotten locked in a hospital supply closet for 40 minutes. Because the handle mechanism was broken and she'd had to call for help using a tongue depressor to bang on the door. Greta's eyes went bright. She repeated the word tongue depressor twice in a row, shaking her head, and the laugh came. Tatum thought about Davis, who would have loved to hear that laugh. She called him that night and described it, and he said without missing a beat, "That old lady has excellent taste." Davis was doing better. The billing statements had stopped arriving. The dialysis center had sent a confirmation of direct billing, and the coordinator there had stopped giving Tatum the look, the careful, apologetic look that meant the conversation was about to get uncomfortable. Davis still made jokes at the center, but now they were just jokes, not armor. She was standing in the kitchen early on a Thursday morning, coffee in hand, watching the lake through the kitchen windows when Julian walked in. He was usually gone by now. "You're still here," she said, and realized immediately it came out wrong, too casual, too unguarded. "It's my house," he said, but not unkindly. He poured his own coffee and stood a few feet away, also looking at the lake. "My grandmother asked me last night if I liked you. What did you tell her?" "I told her yes." He said it like it surprised him slightly to report it. "She told me I have decent instincts for someone who ruins everything." Tatum laughed before she could think not to. It was a real laugh, short and startled. Julian looked at her. He had the expression of a man who had not expected to cause that, and was reckoning with the fact that he was glad he had. "She's not wrong," he said. "About the ruining everything part. What did you ruin?" He shook his head slightly, not refusing to answer, just deciding on the version of it he'd give her. This was supposed to be a quieter life. After 45. I'd planned for it. Plans change. They do. He looked back at the lake. "My wife believed they didn't have to. She wanted to leave all of this. She was right to want it. I told her we were too close to the other side, that a few more years would make it safe to walk away." He paused. She didn't get a few more years. Tatum went still. She understood now why Greta had been placed somewhere with no connection to the Caruso name. Not just for Greta's safety. For containment of grief, of guilt, of the kind of memory that you try to make small by keeping it somewhere you don't have to look at it. "I'm sorry," she said. He nodded, not dismissing it, accepting it, the weight of those 2 words. They stood like that for a moment, not talking, just looking at the water. Then Julian's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and went very still. "Something's wrong," Tatum said. "It wasn't a question. There's a situation." He was already moving. "Stay with my grandmother. Don't leave this floor." He was gone before she could ask anything else. The house changed in the next 2 hours. Men she hadn't seen before moved through the hallways with a quiet urgency that had no heat in it. This wasn't panic, it was trained acceleration, which was somehow more frightening. Helen came to Greta's suite, knocked twice, told Tatum in a voice stripped of anything extra that there was a credible security concern and they were tightening the perimeter. "What does that mean?" Tatum asked. "It means stay inside," Helen said, "and keep the curtains drawn." Greta was awake. She was sitting up in bed with her hands folded and her eyes alert in a way that told Tatum this wasn't the first time she'd seen the house go like this. "Come sit with me," the old woman said. Tatum sat. "He'll be all right," Greta said. "I know," said Tatum, who didn't know. "He always is." Greta patted her hand. "He's stubborn. It's the one thing we have in common." Julian came back after midnight. Tatum was in the chair by Greta's bed, half asleep over a paperback, when she heard footsteps in the hall and recognized the weight of them. She went to the door. He looked like he'd been through something. Not visually. The suit was still intact, but there was a thinness around his eyes and a set to his jaw that hadn't been there this morning. "She's asleep," Tatum said quietly. "Good." He looked past her into the room, confirming it. Then he looked at her. "You stayed. Of course I stayed. I wasn't certain you would," he said. "After the curtains. I wasn't hired to leave when it gets complicated," Tatum said. He was quiet for a moment. In the low light of the hallway he looked older and also somehow more real. Less like a man who owned things and more like a man who carried them. "Mrs. Rao," he said. "Julian." He paused at that. She'd used his first name without thinking, and they both felt it settle. "The situation is resolved," he said. "But I need to tell you something. The man responsible, his name is Renner Burke. He runs an organization that has been trying to acquire our shipping contracts for 2 years. Tonight was meant to be a message." Julian looked at her steadily. "He knows about you. He knows you're here. His intelligence is good." Tatum absorbed that. What kind of message does he want to send? The same kind men like him always want to send. Julian's voice was controlled, but underneath it was something colder. "He'll target what matters to me." She understood what he was saying. She was now, apparently, something that mattered. "I'll offer you a way out," Julian said. "Full severance. Relocation for you and Davis out of state. I'll cover his care wherever you land." Tatum thought about Greta, who had patted her hand in the dark and said he always is with the quiet certainty of someone who had learned not to borrow trouble from the future. She thought about Davis, who was doing better. She thought about what it meant to be someone who didn't leave when things got difficult. It wasn't bravery, exactly. It was more that she didn't know how to be a different version of herself. "No," she said. Julian looked at her with an expression she was beginning to recognize, the one that arrived when she did something he hadn't anticipated. "You understand what I'm telling you?" "I understand," Tatum said. "I'm still saying no. I'm not leaving, Greta." He was quiet for a long moment. "Then the rules change," he said finally. "How? You don't go anywhere alone. Not in this house, not on the grounds. If you need something, you ask for an escort, no exceptions, no negotiating." He held her gaze. "And I need you to be honest with me about what you see, what you hear, what you feel in this house. I have blind spots. I need to know when something is wrong. You want me to be your eyes. I want us to be useful to each other," he said. "Which I believe we already are." It wasn't a romantic declaration. It was something more durable than that, a statement of mutual regard from a man who clearly didn't offer it easily. Tatum felt it the way you feel the shift in air pressure before a storm. Like something was about to be different. "Okay," she said. He nodded once. He didn't say thank you. She was starting to understand that with Julian, action was the language of gratitude. He reached into his jacket and handed her a small device, black about the size of a matchbox. "Personal panic button," he said. "Dante, my head of security, is on the other end. He responds within 90 seconds. She took it. "Go get some sleep," Julian said. "Tomorrow is going to be a long day." It was. 3 days later they went to the Thornfield Benefit, a gala that sat at the exact intersection of Chicago's legal money and its other kind. Julian had explained it to her in the car on the way there, in the same tone he might use to brief a new lieutenant. 5 old families, annual truce dinner, every year the same ritual of men pretending to be only the things they could prove. "You'll be with me the entire evening," he'd said. "You'll hear things. Apply your rule, only know what you actually saw." She'd worn a dress Helen had brought to her room. Deep, silk, backless, the kind of thing that required a different posture. She'd stood in front of the mirror for a moment and not quite recognized herself, and then she'd put her hair up and decided that was fine. Julian had looked at her when she came downstairs and said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "You look like you belong here," and she understood it was the highest compliment he had in that context. The ballroom at the Thornfield was all gold and shadow, and the specific kind of laughter that means no one's having fun. Tatum kept her spine straight and her expression neutral, and stayed at Julian's shoulder the way he'd told her to. Not behind, at his shoulder, which signaled something in the vocabulary of rooms like this. She wasn't sure what it signaled, but she trusted his read. Renner Burke found them by the bar. He was shorter than she'd imagined, wide-shouldered, with a red face and pale eyes, and the particular confidence of a man who has never had someone tell him no in a way that stuck. He smiled at Julian like they were old colleagues. "Caruso," he spread his hands. "Glad to see you made it, after the week you've had, Renner." Julian's voice was pleasant and absolutely empty. Burke's eyes moved to Tatum. He looked at her the way some men look at things they'd like to own. "And this is Tatum," she said. She didn't offer a last name, she'd learned that from him. Burke smiled. It didn't reach anywhere near his eyes. Julian stepping up his standards. "I'm particular," she said, "about people worth knowing." She let the implication settle, that Burke didn't meet the threshold, and kept her expression pleasant the whole time. Burke blinked. Julian shifted almost imperceptibly beside her. Later he'd tell her that was too direct. In the moment, she didn't particularly care. Burke and Julian moved into the careful verbal chess that passed for conversation in rooms like that. Tatum held her sparkling water and watched the room. She developed the habit in her work. Reading spaces for hazards, locating exits, noting who was watching who. She was doing it automatically now, which meant she noticed things. She noticed a man near the service entrance who was watching Julian and not looking away when she caught him doing it. She noticed a conversation across the room that involved a lot of eye contact toward their position. She noticed the man near the service entrance touch his earpiece. She leaned slightly toward Julian. "Service entrance, 11 o'clock, she said, barely moving her lips. "The man in the grey jacket." Julian laughed at something Burke was saying, tilted his head just enough to look, and she felt the tension change in his arm where it brushed hers. "Stay close," he said under the laughter. Things happened quickly after that. The man near the service entrance was not alone. There were 3 of them, and they were moving when Dante's voice crackled in Julian's earpiece, loud enough for Tatum to catch a word. "Position." And then Julian's hand was at her elbow and they were moving too. The galas had protocols, apparently. Everyone at a certain level had protocols for when the truce went wrong. Burke tried to stop them. "Caruso, we're not finished." "We are," Julian said, not slowing. They made it to the side corridor before the situation complicated itself. One of Burke's men, the one from the service entrance, came through a door 30 feet ahead of them. Not running. Just standing there, blocking. He had a hand inside his jacket. Tatum moved before she understood she'd decided to. Not toward the man, she wasn't reckless. But sideways, shoving Julian toward the alcove by the corridor door with everything she had, and the sound that followed was sharp and loud and punched the air out of the room. The shot went wide, hitting the wall where Julian had been standing. Dante materialized from somewhere with 2 other men, and it was over in seconds. The kind of professional efficiency that doesn't look dramatic from the outside, but leaves you with your ears ringing and your hands shaking. Julian turned to her in the alcove. "I shoved you," she said. She was still catching her breath. "I noticed." He was looking at her the way he'd looked at her in the nursing home hallway, like she was a thing he was calculating the meaning of. "Your suit is probably ruined, Tatum." He said her name the way he didn't usually. "No, Miss Rao." Just her name, stripped of its formality. He reached up and touched her face with one hand very lightly, her cheekbone, where she'd apparently hit the wall in the scramble. She hadn't felt it until now. "Are you hurt?" "No." "She might have a bruise." "Are you?" "No." He didn't move his hand immediately. "You pushed me out of the way. You were standing in the wrong place." "You pushed me out of the way," he said again, softer this time, as if the repetition was him trying to file it somewhere that made sense. Dante appeared. "Car's out front. We should move." They moved. On the way back to the house, Julian's phone lit up with a message that made him go completely still. Tatum watched him read it. She watched his jaw tighten. He held the phone so she could see the screen. "She's awake and asking for you. Thought you should know." "Greta. Greta is fine." He turned the phone over. "This is from a number registered to Burke's operation. It's a reference to my granddaughter." "You have a granddaughter?" "I have a granddaughter," he said, like a man confessing something. "Cora. She's 7. She lives with her mother. My daughter-in-law, after my son." He stopped, started again. "She's outside the city. She wasn't supposed to be anywhere near any of this." His voice was controlled. His hands were not. They hit the estate with tires on gravel before the car fully stopped, and Julian was already moving before the door opened. The lights in the house were all on. Helen met them at the door. "She's all right," she said immediately. Dante's secondary team had her. They intercepted Burke's men 6 miles from the house. She's here, she's inside, she's all right. Julian closed his eyes for half a second. That was the entirety of his visible relief. Half a second, and then he was moving again, into the house, toward the sound of a child's voice coming from the kitchen. Cora was sitting at the kitchen island, eating cereal at 2 a.m. She was small and dark-haired, and she looked up when Julian walked in with an expression that was trying to be brave and not entirely succeeding. There was a woman beside her, young, shell-shocked, the daughter-in-law, Tatum guessed, and a man from the security team hovering near the back door. "Grandpa," Cora said. Julian crossed the kitchen and picked her up like she weighed nothing, and for a long moment he just held her, his face buried in her hair, and didn't say anything at all. Tatum stayed in the doorway. When he finally put Cora down, he crouched to her level. He said something quiet that Tatum couldn't hear. Cora nodded, her chin wobbly, and then looked past Julian's shoulder toward the doorway. "Is that her?" Cora asked. The lady Greta said, "Fixed her birds." "That's her," Julian said. Cora studied Tatum with the severe evaluative gaze of a 7-year-old who has learned that adults are not automatically trustworthy. "Greta says you're the best person in the house," she said. "Greta's very generous," Tatum said. "Greta doesn't lie," Cora said. It was a correction, delivered with perfect seriousness. Tatum didn't argue with that. She moved into the kitchen and sat on the stool beside Cora and looked at the cereal. "What kind is that?" "Honey clusters." A pause. "Do you want some? I'd love some." Cora pushed the box toward her and watched her pour, and whatever assessment she'd been running came to some kind of conclusion, because her posture changed, some of the tightness in her small shoulders let go. Julian stood back and watched the two of them, and his face was doing something Tatum had never seen it do before. Like a man watching something he'd stopped believing was possible. Rena Burke was handled in the weeks that followed, quietly, thoroughly, the way Julian Caruso handled things that needed to disappear. The details were not discussed in Tatum's presence, because she'd learned not to ask, and Julian had learned she meant it when she said she didn't need to know. The shipping contracts were settled. The threat level, Helen told her one morning over coffee, had been reduced to baseline. Cora and her mother moved into the East Wing. Greta had an opinion about every decision Cora made, delivered from the armchair in the sunroom, and Cora argued back with a tenacity that was, Tatum thought, extremely hereditary. Davis came to visit in November. He and Cora spent an entire afternoon playing cards and teaching each other games the other one didn't know, and when Tatum came to find them, they were both on the floor in the sunroom, with Greta watching and keeping score in a way that seemed to be mostly invented. "Your brother is funny," Julian said that evening. He'd been watching from the hallway in the way he sometimes watched things he didn't know how to be part of yet. "He is," Tatum agreed. "He's also the reason I have good instincts." "How so?" "I spent 15 years making sure he was okay," she said. "You learn to read rooms when the stakes are real." Julian was quiet for a moment. "You stayed," he said. It came from somewhere specific, the same place as all his careful words. "When I offered you the exit, you stayed. You keep coming back to that. I keep being surprised by it," he said. She looked at him in the low evening light of the hallway. This man who had built a fortress around himself and the people inside it and called it protection and hadn't noticed it was also a kind of grief. She thought about how long it takes to stop bracing for something, how the right conditions can make it happen almost without you deciding to. "I didn't stay because of the money," she said. "I know," Julian said. "I didn't stay because of Greta either. Not only." He looked at her. He wasn't a man who asked questions when he was afraid of the answers, but he was asking this one with everything except words. "I stayed because you were trying," she said. "Even when you didn't know how. Even when you got it wrong, you were trying." She paused. "That matters to me." Julian reached out and took her hand. He held it the way he'd held his grandmother's hand that first morning in the suite. Carefully, like something that could be broken if you forgot to be present, but also like something he intended to keep. "I'm going to keep getting things wrong," he said. "I want you to know that going in. I work in healthcare," Tatum said. "I'm very comfortable with complicated cases." Julian Caruso looked at her for a long moment, and something in his face that had been held in careful suspension for a long time finally moved. He smiled. It was real and a little crooked, and it was the most unguarded thing she'd ever seen him do. "Then welcome to the family, Miss Rao?" Greta's voice drifted from the sunroom, where she had apparently been listening this entire time. "It's about time."